For today's workshop, I'm going to start off with making soy milk, as that is a more labor-intensive process. And the reason I chose soy milk is it's one of the first plant-based milks that have existed for centuries, starting out in China. And one thing that's really good about soybeans is that they are a complete protein. They also offer good amounts of calcium and other nutrients. And it's also a very versatile crop. It's a nitrogen fixer, so it's good for the soil and it grows in a lot of different climates. So I'm going to switch us over to the counter cam so you can watch along on how this works. So what I have here are soybeans that have soaked overnight, and to promote better agricultural practices, it is good to use organic soybeans if you can. And all you have to do is just let them sit in some water overnight or for at least 6 to 8 hours. And the reason for that is so that it softens up the beans. So the first step of making soy milk is to grind up the beans. So in a blender, so I have here a blender with 1.5 liters of water. And I'm going to quickly strain these soybeans, just strain out the water. And the amount of soybeans that are in here is 3/4 of a cup dry. So you can see the beans, they expand quite a bit. So there's a lot more than 3/4 of a cup now because it's gotten bigger from the water, but when it's dry, it's 3/4 cup. So just add all that in. And then you're going to put this onto the mixer and just pulse it. So I'm going to actually just turn my microphone off because it's going to be very loud. Okay, so that's about right. And I'm going to show you on this other camera what it looks like. So you have some of the soybeans that are ground up settling at the bottom, and you don't want to grind it up so that it's very, very small like a powder. It just has to be roughly kind of like grains of salt. That's the size that you want it to get to. Once you have that ready, then the contents of the blender are going to go into a large pot on the stove. And then you're gonna put the stove on medium-high heat. So you want it hot enough so that it would start boiling, but you don't want it to overboil. So I'm going to leave this here, and it's going to cook for about 20 minutes, but you need to watch it very carefully and make sure that it does not boil over. During this workshop, you might find that I'm multitasking and making sure that this liquid here does not bubble over top. It might actually happen, and then we'll see a bit of a mini explosion, but that's okay. And that's quite normal as well, because when you're making soy milk, there's a lot of froth that forms, and so just be prepared and have some cloths close by. But one way to be able to mitigate that is to just keep the stove a little bit lower, and then you can cook it for a bit longer. So this is going to be going for about 20 minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you what you can do with some of the pulp. So the reason that we need to cook soy milk is that there are lots of enzymes that are in soy when it's raw, and they're actually just not very digestible. So by cooking it, then we actually can digest it in our stomachs. The recipe that I'm going to show you here is a soy patty, and it's going to use the pulp. So the pulp looks like this, and it's just ground up soybeans that have been strained. So after this soy milk boils, then you strain the pulp. So I'll show that later on, but this is some strained pulp that I made earlier today. So with one batch of strained pulp, so this is going to be approximately a cup and a half. That's our first ingredient in these patties. So these patties, they're kind of like a veggie burger, but not really what you would expect out of a burger in texture. It's a little bit softer. And to that, I'm going to add, this is a shallot. And this is a very flexible recipe. You can use a lot of different things in it. I'm also going to add a cup of cooked lentils. And these cooked lentils, for me, they're just leftovers. So this is a good way to use up some leftovers. Also adding one egg. Now, if you're vegan and you don't want to use egg in the recipe, a substitution you can make is to use 1 tablespoon of ground flax seeds and mix it with about a tablespoon and a half of water. And that gives you something that is kind of like an egg, or you can skip it completely. The egg just helps with binding everything together. And to this, we're also going to add some soy sauce. As well as cornstarch. The cornstarch is, again, to help bind it together. So I added about a tablespoon of soy sauce, and then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. And then you can just mix this really well together. Now from here, if you want something that's more of a patty or something that resembles more of a burger, you can put this into a food processor or a blender just to grind it up a bit more. Or if you want the bigger texture, say with the lentils and the onions, you can just leave it as it is. Next, if you want, you can actually just make these patties as they are, or you can coat them in breadcrumbs. Normally I just take a small scoop, and this is where you just put it in your hands. Make a patty like that, and then toss it in the breadcrumbs and put it onto a tray. Once all the patties are formed, then you can put it into an oven and bake it for about 30 to 35 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So as it's cooking, you need to keep stirring because it's already starting to stick a little bit to the bottom. And you can see that there's this foam that's starting to form on the top. And in the meantime, we are going to make our next type of milk, which is hemp milk. For hemp milk, it's actually very, very simple. So I have 1 liter of water, that's right here. And to that liter of water, I'm going to add half a cup of hemp hearts. Then all you have to do with this is blend it. Again, I'm going to put myself on mute for this. This is what it looks like when it's finished. So the hemp hearts actually break up very, very quickly, and you don't need to soak them ahead of time. And I find for me, because the hemp grains are so small, I actually don't even bother with straining it. I just mix it together and that's it. Now with hemp milk, sometimes the taste is a little bit bitter. So what I like to do is add a very small amount of sweetener, which in this case, I'm going to add maple syrup because it's made in Canada. And you don't need very much. Oh, you know how I was saying that this thing can boil over? Well, that just happened right now. It looks like this. So everything just exploded a little bit. There's the result of the stove. So that's why often you need to be very careful. Starting to boil over, you can turn it down to a medium heat and just let it simmer. And again, continue to keep stirring it so that you don't end up with it boiling over. And then we'll go back to our hemp milk. This is ready to go. For storage, just put it into a jar and then put it in your fridge. Now with these fresh milks, they don't last as long as the store-bought milks because there are no preservatives in here. So the best thing to do is to try to use these up within a few days. The good thing is, especially with hemp milk, it's so easy to make, because that just took a few minutes right there, that you can just make it as you need it. But this is the finished product. It's going into my fridge. We just have 2 more minutes before this is done. So that's what it looks like. Okay, I see some questions that have come in, which are great, so I will answer those while we wait. So it's a really good question about the hemp milk. So the hemp milk does not need to be boiled. You can just have the hemp milk straight without boiling. In terms of the soy milk, it just needs to be at a high enough temperature to start to boil and bubble. It doesn't need to be at a rolling boil the entire time that you're cooking it. The time is up for our soy milk, so I'm going to turn that off the stove. And now we're going to strain the soy milk. So to strain the soy milk, I usually have this jug, which happens to fit the strainer very, very well. So that is very convenient. But you can do this into a bowl or any other container. This is a fine mesh strainer. And I find that for me, the fine mesh strainer is enough, but there are still some pulp solids that end up in the milk. If you want a lot less pulp in your milk, then you can use a cheesecloth. So if you want very, very small amounts of pulp and you want it to be very kind of like a thinner soy milk, more like what you would find, say, from the grocery store, then use either one cheesecloth or even double up the cheesecloth so you catch as much of the pulp as possible. But I find that I don't think that's necessary for me, for my own taste, and I'm okay with a little bit of pulp in my soy milk, and it just strains a lot faster when you don't use a cheesecloth, but it is an option. Now this step, it's good to do it over the sink, again, because it can be a little bit messy, but I'll just do it on the counter for demonstration. And normally I need to do about half of it at a time because the pulp tends to build up a little bit. So you can just gently dewater the pulp. Just push the liquid out. And set the pulp aside. And there you have it. That's the finished soy milk. Again, put it into a jar, or multiple jars in this case. Now with the soy milk, because it's so hot, this is the finished product, leave it out at room temperature to cool off a little bit before putting into the fridge. There's a question about the hemp milk in terms of wanting to drink it warm. So you can warm it up if you want to have it warm. It's just that it's not necessary to need to boil it. So if you feel like you want some warm hemp milk, you can always put it on the stove, warm it up, or you can use it to make coffee, make hot chocolate or other beverages. You can cook with it, you can bake with it. You can use it just about in any way that you would use normal milk. And so that applies to both the hemp milk and the soy milk. And that is it actually for our demonstration. Are there any other questions? I have a question about almond milk. Okay, so the process for almond milk is similar to the hemp milk. The only difference is that you do need to soak the almond milks ahead of time. So for almond milk, you would soak the almonds overnight or for at least 6 to 8 hours, and then put it into a blender and blend the almonds with water. After that, strain the almond pulp out, and then whatever is remaining is the almond milk, and then with the almond pulp, you can do whatever you want with it. Almond milk does not need to be cooked like soy milk. So in terms of the types of plant-based milks, anything that's made with nuts or seeds, those don't need to be cooked. Anything made with beans or pulses, so pea milk, for instance, using split peas, that would need to be cooked. And that is just because with beans and legumes and pulses, they can't be eaten raw by the human body because it's not very digestible. For the hemp milk, you don't need to roast the hemp seeds before making it. It's actually fine just raw hemp seeds. So the shelled hemp seeds that you buy from the grocery store, that is all you need to use. And thank you very much for joining, and hope to see you next week.